Well, hey there. You've stumbled upon the intersection of internet quandaries and psychological insight. Welcome to Veritas Views on AITA, where the quirks of the internet meet the expertise of Veritas psychology partners.
Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Michael McBride. I'm joined by our dynamic duo of psychologists.
I'm Dr. Gayle MacBride, and as we dig into the murky waters of am I the asshole or not, I am joined by my business partner, Dr. Daniel Kessler, who is never afraid to tell me I'm the asshole. Dan, it's true. You are so good at calling me out. I love it. That's why you're my partner in this.
Fair. The good news is that that is a fairly mutual thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Although you're less likely to say, Dan, you're an asshole. You're more likely to say, I don't know if that works for you, Dan. Like, I'm not
Might
sure
need to soften that approach.
Yeah, it's more of a Minnesota approach. Like,
it's true.
Most guys wouldn't do that. Like, I mean, if you think it's a good idea to go ahead but I'm not sure that's the best choice, which is the Minnesota way of saying, what the fuck are you doing?
This is true. And I would say the same is true of you to me. When you call me out on my bullshit, you do it in a kind and professional way. I appreciate that.
Michael, you can cut that. You can cut that last little nicety out in post. All right, that's totally not necessary. All right, you got all of that said. Now that we're done with our introductions, Michael, do you have something interesting for us to talk about today? Not that we're not already interesting without something interesting to talk about.
Yeah, I hope so. But for any of the newbies out there, if you wonder what the hell this is, essentially, it's a conversation between these two psychologists who work at Veritas Psychology's Partners. And what I've done is I've gone out on the internet and I found a post where somebody has shared a scenario that they lived through and asked, who's the asshole here? And that's essentially what Dan and Gayle are going to weigh in on. So I've de-identified some of the posts to make them a little more discreet. And if you're new, stick around through the credits. We're going to address a couple of our mailbag questions. So
I love mailbag questions.
Me too. It's always fun to see what people ask. So sometimes it's what we got wrong. Sometimes it's a new idea. Sometimes, who knows? We'll see what it is. So. But for now, neither Gayle nor Dan have seen or read this post. They have no idea what I'm going to throw their way. So let's go. Today's topic is, am I the asshole for asking my wife to take down a social media post about our child's heart surgery?
No.
Okay. That's the end of the show, guys. Thanks for coming.
Okay. All right, we're out.
And credits.
We're out. Close. Wow. Maybe we should hear the rest of the scenario.
Well, yeah, maybe we should. Sure. However,
yeah.
I tend to, when talking about kids on social media, I tend to err on the side of, like, if one parent's not okay with it, that being one of those two yeses, one no situations that we run into so often with couples.
Like two yeses, one no. Very succinct.
Yeah, no, I think with relationships, there's an awful lot of two yeses and one no's kind of situation where both people have to be on board. If one person's not, then you just don't. And I want to hear the story here, and Michael's going to give it to us. But I kind of want to, in my head, whenever talking about a conflict, between a couple, I will ask myself, like, is this a two yeses, one no situation? In which case, one person kind of does get to dictate because you're breaking a boundary. But Michael, please share.
For sure. So this is what I got. Our teenage son was born with a congenital heart defect and recently had their second open heart surgery. Everything went well, and while in the hospital, we kept family and friends updated via text. After we got home, my wife made a social media post about his surgery, saying she hoped it would be their last. The truth is, it probably won't be, though future procedures might be less invasive. When I saw the post, I asked her to adjust the wording, which she did begrudgingly. Then I asked to talk privately. She initially refused and made dismissive comments in front of the kids, which I was trying to avoid. When we did finally talk, I told her I didn't think we should be sharing his medical history publicly. It should be our son's choice, especially now that he's a teenager, not ours. I also worried about how this could impact his future relationships, friendships, or even career. She said it was her social media, that many people were praying for our son, and that I was overanalyzing everything. She kept getting questions from family and friends, and she felt like this was a way of just sharing that information. The conversation escalated, and she finally said, fine, whatever, I'll delete it. At that point, I asked her to pause so we could come to an agreement rather than enact in frustration, but she refused, deleted the post, and ignored me for the rest of the night. So am I the asshole for thinking our son's medical information shouldn't be shared publicly without their consent?
No. I go back to what you said, Dan. There's an issue here of maybe even 3 yeses. And we have a teenage person who
Mhm.
has some control or say so over their image in public spaces. I really think as parents, we need to be checking in with our kid and
Mhm.
what they're okay with and provide them guidance. Just because our kid is okay with something doesn't mean they have a developed brain enough to actually weigh those decisions. And so while the conversation sounds like it's spun out of control and maybe a little quicker than we would like, I kind of agree with the poster in most part because I don't think that social media is a place to share it. Now, where they missed is that dream within the conflict between
Mhm.
the two of them, right? What is it that each of them want to achieve? What is the
Right.
purpose of
Right.
this? And how can we find a space to get those needs met without just squashing on it and just saying social media bad, boom, done.
Yeah, I'm gonna stand by my snap judgment on this.
Mhm.
Um, and we, we've in the course of this podcast, even a couple weeks back, we were doing one, and I disclosed something about one of my kids that I don't think he would care.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I stopped myself afterwards, and I'm like, and I said, "Hey, Michael, delete that when you edit this." And it was edited out, and no one will ever hear it. And I'm pretty sure he won't mind me saying this much. Um, 'Cause I'm not actually saying anything. But I think it's one of those things where we need to be careful. And when I did political work, and my kids are in some of the politicky stuff that I did, and that was a conversation my wife and I had. Like, is this okay? How do we feel about this? And I know there are other people who choose not to have their kids, and again, it falls into that one no, two yeses category. If one parent's not okay with it, I think it really is. But you're right. Like, what about what if this is a teenager now? He's got his own say so over his own medical stuff, and we both. I don't work with neither one of us work with younger teens, but once you get into a certain cage category, at least here in Minnesota, you gain some rights over your record.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. And so I think it's always a good idea to ask your kids, even just making a practice at home when they're young of even asking, right? Because we want to raise children who are conscious and aware of how their images and their stories are going to be used
Right.
and to have them practice being able to say yes or no. So we did this with our own children at home.
Hmm.
Is this okay? How about this image versus that image? Getting say so over what is there. Very often, I don't post my child's name, and I try to set that model for other people. So I will indicate which child, but I won't necessarily use their full name. I pulled that from another mom in the family that I really appreciated that. And now that they're quite a bit older, honestly, we just set the audience and we make that audience really, really small. And sometimes if I want to share something, let's say with a grandparent, I just set it to only that person. So using those,
You can set the only you can change the
Mhm.
audience.
Yeah.
Oh, now you tell me.
Oh, yeah. Right. And I think it's an
Old man using
opportunity to
social
not
media
use
alert.
social media in a black and white kind of way, either a yes or a no, but how do we want to use it? How do we want to be thoughtful with it?
Yeah.
That's the conversation I would have loved the couple to have
Well,
been able to have.
shit. We're back to the idea that we should have a polite, respectful, reasonable conversation where no one's accusing anyone of doing anything, and no one's saying, well, you're being overprotective and unrealistic and unkind, and oh, you're being, rude and self-disclosing. And these are conversations that I hears that, and we're also back to that. I could see people just, well-thinking, smart, respectful people having respectful disagreements on this and both thinking that they're right. And I mean, Gail, how do you work with couples when one has one opinion, the other has the other opinion, and neither one is wrong?
Right. No, and we first acknowledge that. We start with this is a difference. This isn't about right or wrong. And we need to navigate this difference so that it's respectful of both of your thoughts and opinions. And let's talk about what the core issues here are. What feeds your opinion? How do you come to this? Is there something here that you're attached to or you've experienced that makes this really, really important to you? What are the values here? And we start with a whole conversation about what's underneath the issue so that we can at least have a better understanding. When couples can go, oh, now I get it. I don't agree, but I get it. We can then a lot of times remove the resentment in terms of what we agree to do. And I know people wince at this idea of compromise because they think they're
I
losing
do.
something. They think they're losing something. I know you just called me an asshole, by the way, just
I
very softly in general.
no, I
Thanks.
won't. I won't. Well,
But if you can frame a compromise in the sense of I have been willing to move my thought and opinion, and I'm in a new place with this. I'm
I
not losing anything. I've gained understanding.
yeah, I have where I have that immediate visceral
Yeah.
response that those of you watching on video have seen. Where I get the cringy responses, I don't like. I just maybe don't like the word compromise because compromise implies in its usage, I'm giving up something that's important to me, and you're giving up something that's important to you in order to come to a middle ground.
And I think that's
And
the error.
right, right. But I think that for me, that word carries it carries that meaning. I have a hard time getting beyond it, and I really like for couples to reframe that as a, and I know you do too, but I don't, I just, it's the word. It's
So
my
what word
objection
would you
isn't to the
use
stuff.
instead? Because
I
I
talk
still don't
about,
think the word is inaccurate.
I talk about the word about, I just use the phrase win-win more often so that
Sure.
both people are getting their needs met without giving, like you're not giving in, you're not giving up what's important to you. You're finding a place where you both are getting a win out of it. Now, that can be a challenge when, if it comes down to one, they don't have a place where they can find that space. But there's a
Right.
lot more opportunities to find those spaces where both people can win than folks think.
But I also think win-win sort of sets us up a little bit because it says I'm going to be able to retain something that maybe is mutually exclusive to what my partner wants. Like I think it can get us into a little bit of a fantasy land. I like the idea of, and I'm going to hold on to compromise, and we do
Ooh.
this well.
Ooh.
We
See,
can
that was
have
that
conflict
Minnesota calling out an asshole thing.
a little
Fantasy.
bit. So maybe I set the tone today. But I like the idea of compromise. Yes, I am going to maybe lose something, and that's okay because the thing I'm losing that I thought was important to me no longer I realize is the thing that was exactly important to me, that I've really whittled it down. I've made that more of a narrow kind of non-negotiable, and from that point I have made a compromise. I have compromised on something that I thought I held. I needed to shed that to be able to move with my
Mm,
partner. And so I don't think that it's a bad thing to teach people to move on those things that they thought were initially unmovable.
yeah, I'm still I
It's a matter of difference. See Kessler, see McBride, you get different
I'm
brands of
still
things.
gonna I think that word to me just carries is so laden with meaning that I'm struggling to
Sure.
get beyond.
And
Um,
that's fine. And we do have these connotations of these words, but our clients come in and they're really scared of conflict.
right.
No,
No, that's
like
fair.
we
That's
have these
fair.
emotionally laden words, and I think sometimes our job is to say, wait. What is the true meaning of this word? Let's stop getting so wrapped up in what we think it means.
Okay, no, and I'll go along with that. I think I do like the idea of where we can move people from this like it has to be this way kind of thing. Like how do we find a place of I mean, mom wants to talk. Unfortunately, this is going to be a tough one because mom wants to talk about their kid and thinks it's okay to talk about their kid. Dad doesn't want to talk about the kid. Neither one of them bothered to ask the kid, by the way.
Right.
We
That's
often talk about
huge,
the
man.
minor third party characters in our
Uh-huh.
stories here, but this third party character of the kid, like if you went to the kid, you're like, I'm fine with it. And then again, now we have to look at, well, you're fine with it, but how old is the person, and are they at a point in their development where they can make that judgment? I might be fine with that for my 18-year-old, but I might not be as fine with that for my 13-year-old,
Mhm.
not fully understanding the
Are
implications of social
respectful
media.
ways to share that information where we're not blasting it out to the world. Again, changing your
Yeah.
audience, maybe using a Caring Bridge site or something like that.
But even a carrying bridge, if dad's not okay with this, I mean, we risk getting into gender stuff here, but
Mhm.
I don't care which parent it is. If one parent is not okay with sharing our children's personal information, we don't share our children's personal information. Maybe I'm being a little absolutist here.
Well, what
Um,
if the kid says, let's massage the facts for a moment. So what if the kid says, yeah, no, I'm cool with it. I think Aunt, Joe out in California, we're 2,500 miles away from her. Absolutely, she wants to know. I don't care, but I want it to stay till family. And kid's okay with it. Kid's
how
13.
old is kid in
Kid's
your in
13.
your
I don't know. I'm in
kid's
my
13?
on
I
the low end of of that age range here in Minnesota.
I honestly think it depends on the kid and the situation. I'm not going to be an absolutist about if the kid's okay with it. I would lean more into being okay with it myself.
Mhm.
Um, but this is one of those areas that it's so easy to get like, and social media being what it is. Um, what's out there, once we put it out there,
It's there.
it's there.
Yeah.
It ain't going away. And maybe that's fine, maybe it's not fine. Um,
Can I jump in really quick?
Please do,
Please,
because
please. We
We're
probably are at the place where we should talk about the comments anyway.
well.
yeah, what are the
Before we get to what
Okay.
their judgment was, one of the big side conversations here was the mom's right to share that information, which you guys started to touch on. And some of the internet said mom has the right to share her experience. And but how you walk that line of sharing your personal experience about something that impacts somebody else is really difficult.
yeah.
And so, the internet and their ultimate wisdom had lots of ideas. I'm curious if you have thoughts about how to kind of splice that, because I do think that's really
Sure.
difficult. Like, I want to talk about this thing that I'm going through, but it also involves this other thing,
Mhm.
this other person who may or may not be okay with it.
I am more okay with it um if we're talking about mom sharing her own experience, but mom can share that experience with going through a lot with kids' illnesses and things in the family and could be, I don't know. I think
It's such a slippery slope here.
yeah, there are ways of doing it that are more about me and less about my kid's medical history.
Mhm. That
I
said, if
struggle
she
with it.
showed up in my office and harumphed down and like, oh, and I'm, not
Harumphed.
allowed to share and who's, I would spend some time talking with her about the need that she is hoping to get met through
Mm-hmm.
posting this, right? We know that we
Yeah.
experience as a reader and a consumer of social media information that there is a need that the poster has in that situation. And likely it seems to me that the need is support, reaching out and
Right.
feeling heard and seen and supported. So maybe we would start talking about ways to get that need met in a way that doesn't feel difficult for other family members, right? The cost of this support is the anger and upset of your husband, your spouse, your child,
Mm-hmm.
and you have a very real need here. And so what does that look like for you? How do we do that in a way that creates support for you as you go through something that sounds like it's ongoing and difficult and scary as a parent?
I like that a lot. I like it because that gets at the underlying motivation behind why she's posting it, and I neglected that. But yeah, if she's posting all of this personal information, she's posting all of this about the kid. If she's feeling that, I mean, I love that. I don't want to repeat what you said already because it was so well stated. But yeah, what need are you looking to
Yeah.
get met, and is there another way of getting that met? So now we have a chance to get that win-win situation where dad gets the need for the privacy and mom gets the need for the support, and neither one of them is violating the other's ethical perspective or making the other one do things their way.
Yeah,
Wow, you fixed this for them.
I did. If only
Good
they were in my
job. That's great. What did the internet say, Michael?
It was pretty much a 50-50 split. I mean, there were some outliers, but the majority of them fell in the camp of you're not the asshole or everybody sucks here. Like those are really the two camps that everybody fell into.
I could
So
see
the
the everybody sucks here if dad is perceived as being controlling and unyielding and demanding and hostile. I could certainly see the everyone sucks here.
and the
No one's letting
everybody's
mom off the hook though, it sounds like.
no, very few of them. And you know, I mean, it's as you guys have pointed out in previous episodes, it's really hard. You don't really get mom's direct perspective here.
Yeah.
You get
Yeah.
dad, who is obviously a, you know, he's invested in this scenario, and he knows what he thinks is right, you know, and he
And
is
he knows
presenting.
how he thinks he said it. So who knows how he actually, initiated
Oh
this
yeah.
conversation with his partner, and she may have doubled down on her defensiveness depending on how harsh that startup was.
It is and the concept of the harsh startup is something people so rarely get. Like well, they shouldn't say people so rarely get. People will struggle with this. They'll come into our office and say like, I went to my wife. I see this guy going like, I went to my wife and I'm like, hey, like I don't think that's an appropriate thing for social media, and I would really like, take it down. And the wife is like, are you kidding me? You stormed into the room and you said, how dare you post that about our kid? How could you do something so stupid? And
Right.
he's recounting this, and I could totally see like if he came into the room and was like, did use the positive, and I use that very like, hey, I'd really think it's best if we didn't do this. She might react very different than if he came in guns blazing and called her stupid, which people do sometimes to their
Mm-mm.
spouses, and it's awful to call names, and we certainly talk about that. Um, but like that idea of the harsh startup is so critical. How do you again, Gail, how do you pull people away from that? Like, do you just like boom, that was a harsh startup, and like, what do you do when you hear that story?
Oh, when I hear it, absolutely, I will name it and say, that sounds like a harsh startup. Let's try this again, but let's try softening it. And I'll usually give them an example of what that sounds like. And I just love if we can do, so I use kind of a three factor maybe model, back pocket
Hmm.
skill. It always starts with compliment, follow with an I feel, and then I need. Right. If you can't do the real and genuine compliment, ditch that one. That is the one that is optional because we can smell a fake compliment a mile away. Won't help anybody. Right. But if you can start from a place of acknowledging what is good and right about your partner, the conversation goes a lot farther for you and for them because it is a good reminder for you that they are not Satan incarnate, right? You love this person, you agreed to partner with them. Like there's something there. And sometimes using that as a little bit of a touchstone is super
Yeah.
helpful.
There's one. I sorry, I
And
interrupted you.
then we go on to the I feel and the I need, right? So you keep it in your court. You keep it about you, right? Like I know you really mean well here. I feel really uncomfortable with this post. I need to talk to you a little bit about how we share our son's medical information.
I have a
It's
hard
simple.
time. I would hope that mom in this situation, if dad walked in the room with like, I get that you really want to talk about this and this is important to you. And I read that and it was hard for me. I felt like it may have crossed a line. I don't know what it is for son. I felt really uncomfortable with it. Would you be willing to change it or
Hmm.
take it down or like I don't maybe dad did approach it that way. But and we really have to underscore we only get one side of this. And I wonder, you know, if mom would have written this, dad came in, my husband came in guns ablazing, like all angry and hostile towards me, and of course I got defensive, and not that defensive is okay, it's a whole other thing, but like I would like to think that this couple, if they had a good, reasonable, rational conversation, they might come to a very different place.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Agreed. Other things from the comments, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, those were really, I mean, you guys touched on most of them. I mean, regardless of whether it was everybody sucks here or you're not the asshole, everybody commented like you shouldn't be posting private information, medical information about your son without his permission, especially if he's a teenager. And a number of people asked how old he was. You know, like you pointed out, 13 and 18 is different, but she never, or he never weighed in on the response to that. Um, there were eh, those people who there were very few people who said the dad was being an asshole, and they really called him out for manipulating the post and to really make him seem best. Like he, the way he described the way the conversation went down and his wife's reactions were clearly not objective. And they're like, come on, man, you're really putting your finger on the scale and blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. And so
It sounded that way to me too. Like
Yeah.
I get the sense that he did not come into the room with like kindness and gentleness and positive intent. He came into the room with anger and frustration and irritation and that sort of thing. So
yeah. Yeah, that's kind of what we got. But thanks so much again for another riveting debate and a glimpse into the collective conscience of the internet forums.
And remember, if you're looking around trying to find the asshole and you can't find one, it might be you.
yeah, in my case, it usually is.
Yeah, and stick around. We're going to read one of our mailbag questions. I'm going to throw it at Dan and Gayle and see what they come up with. But in the meanwhile, please do follow, share Veritas Views, any of the podcast platforms with your neighbors and friends. And as always, like I said, stick around. We'll have another chat just after Kelly says our disclaimer, our credits, all that kind of stuff. So see you on the other side.
You can follow Dr. Dan Kessler at Dr. Dan Kessler and Dr. Gayle MacBride at Dr. G. MacBride. Oh, and you can find them both at veritaspp.com. Credits. Tickling the Ivories, Matthew Redington. Art, production, and design, bringing this show together with flair and finesse, Michelle Love. Recording and editing, turning chaos into something worth sharing, Michael MacBride. Intro, outro, I'm Kelly Buttrick, a VO talent who just happens to be Dr. MacBride's cousin. Cats, CJ, Linus, Sadie, and Griffin. Hosting by whomever lost the coin flip. Interruptions by all their children. The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Listening to this podcast does not constitute a therapist-client relationship. If you believe you may be experiencing a mental health issue, please seek the assistance of a qualified mental health professional. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis, you can call or text 988 from anywhere in the U.S. to be connected to Crisis Mental Health Services.
Thanks for listening. As promised, here's that bonus conversation. In this case, I am the asshole. This comment to one of our podcasts has been sitting out there for 6 months, and I just noticed it the other day. So
6 months.
I know.
Wow.
I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. It slipped through the filters or whatever.
But Michael, as Gayle and I have discussed, being an asshole requires some intent. Merely not noticing or doing things as well as you'd like to doesn't make you the asshole.
I
So
appreciate
I'm
that.
unwilling. I do not accept that you're the asshole in this case. However, you're my podcast partner, who also happens to be your wife, may disagree with that for all sorts of reasons that we won't get into.
I am completely biased in the judgment of my husband being an asshole. I kind of like the guy,
So you don't think he's an asshole? That is wonderful. That is
Yeah.
terrific.
Right. So
Okay,
we missed it, guys. We missed it, and we're sorry, but here we are to rectify it. Ask away. What is?
Yeah. So
what is the question?
this is in relationship to the Super Bowl episode, which I don't know, for anybody who hasn't listened to it, go back and listen to it. But the very short version is a group of friends get together for a Super Bowl thing, and two people show up with their young child, and they weren't told not to bring a child. And
18 months, as I recall.
Wow, your memory is much better than mine. Yeah, I think
Was
that's
that
right.
Gayle?
18 months. I think the child was 18 months old. I do remember this conversation.
Oh, yeah. I
Yeah.
don't.
So this is the comment, and I'll just read it just like it says, which is, "Oh my gosh, definitely the asshole. Don't agree with the woman's psych." I assume that's you, Gayle.
Me? Well, because Dan rarely gets mistaken as a woman. So
Typically not.
A host was under no obligation to explain the obvious, that a Super Bowl party is an adult event. Booze, yelling, inappropriate jokes are part of the expectation. Same with weddings. Unless kids are specifically invited, get a babysitter or don't go. Missing an event when your kids are little is just part of being a parent, not the end of the world. These two psychs are doing just what happens when a kid shows up at an adult event. The kids become the center of attention, and the adult behavior is modified to suit the kid. Not fun for many adults. I don't quite understand that last piece, but
I do, and I think it's a really interesting perspective. This person has brought an alternative forward, which I really do appreciate. And I thought about it a little bit as I read the mailbag question that we really did focus on what it was like to bring the kid there, as opposed to having a basic understanding that this is an adults only, because of the kind of activities, the food consumed, that kind of thing, that it's really not a family event.
I I don't want to discourage anyone from using our mailbag, but in this particular and so please you send us your questions. I'm gonna disagree respectfully. I think that not every Super Bowl party is an adults only party. And I've been to many Super Bowl parties where there are kids involved, especially as I get a little older and more people in my friend group had kids. So I'm gonna respectfully disagree and say that there's not an assumption that a Super Bowl party is kids only. Now, the example he gave or she gave of a wedding invitations are very specific,
Hmm.
and only the people who are listed on the invitation. So if the wedding invitation comes to me and my wife, I'm never going to presume I can bring a kid to a wedding. Um, and we can get into like an infant maybe, but like at what point does the infant no longer qualify as an infant? And there's some math there, and I, but that's at the very most, at the very least, a question for the couple who's getting married. The Super Bowl party, I disagree.
Yeah, I think the only hesitation I have is I think in the scenario that we were given, the fact pattern such as it was that this was the only couple with children. And so I think the person who wrote into the mailbag is bringing an interesting perspective, that
Hmm.
we make some assumptions about who is coming to the party. If you and I were having, let's say, a Super Bowl party 5 years ago, or even 8 years ago, like, we would have assumed that we were bringing children, and that would have been the
100%.
baseline assumption.
Right.
I think now, when our children are older, it's maybe more of a question mark of whether or not, I mean, it's us, so yes, the kids are always welcome. But in the posters fact pattern, I think we're the first ones. We have a fairly younger, I think, friend
Yeah.
group happening, and I think up until that point, it probably was adults only. And so that transition into we bring kids maybe is a bit more on the parents. Or I like the perspective of, sometimes as parents you don't go to things, and you have,
Yeah.
and I just, again, it was separate from this particular event, but a nice reminder that as parents we will focus on raising our children, and the activities that we used to attend start to change, and we don't always have
Yeah.
all of the things. And I thought that was
What
at least a valuable thing to bring forward.
what our mailbag person, I think, and I'm gonna really be less what our mailbag person missed is we're always talking about how everything we need to have conversations,
Absolutely.
and we're not supposed to make assumptions. And while it may not be unreasonable to assume that the party is going to be whatever, that's a conversation. And all
Agreed.
these things should be conversations.
Yes.
So I'm gonna again, as respectfully as I can, disagree with our mailbag person. But please, like, disagree with me. Send us a mailbag question.
Absolutely.
Tell me I'm wrong. I
Yes.
those are always fun to get.
Cool.
And I'll say, we do have a contact us form right on the podcast page. I would definitely recommend using that. Those come right in directly to our inbox, where the YouTube comments, sometimes I miss them. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We do our best to keep up with them. But anyway, thanks to everyone for tuning in. Thanks for sending us the comment. Tune in again next week for a whole nother Am I the Asshole debate.
We love hearing from you, so please review us on Apple, Spotify, or, well, wherever you're listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please review, like, and follow. Also, give it a share. This helps us reach more listeners.